Guaranteed not to be sued over losing out on another horrible beating in the music industry. Welcome back to Motorsport 101. Mustard!
Well,
hi,
you see, this was clearly a reference to the addition of Buick Formula One in 2026.
God, I wish this was the case. Kendrick Lamar could single-handedly save the relevance of the Buick brand outside of mainland China.
You see that? That was a topical joke, kids. We call that a pro podcast move. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 556 of Motorsport 101. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Dre Harrison. Glad you can join us as ever for another episode. And this is a strong one. This is a big one. I actually didn't realize before we sat down and recorded this is the first time we've done an F1 episode in almost a month because of the break, the hiatus. We got a little bit infatuated by bozo jeans and all of that good shit. But yes, here we are to talk about Formula One and Las Vegas and a lot more than that. We have a lot to get through this episode, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. First up, you could probably already guess the esteemed panel given they had to interrupt the intro. First up is Mr. Cameron Buckley. Hello, sir.
Reporting from sick bay. It is I. It has been a bad week. Lots of body aches, a little bit of lung butter, but I am here.
Lung butter, that's a new one.
Oh, yeah. And, well, if MotoGP was us constantly referencing Tekken, then this would surely be us referencing Soul Calibur. Because Max Verstappen, welcome to the stage of history.
No kidding.
Four-time champion of the world.
Yeah, my man hit him with that giant Siegfried-esque sword against the field for this entire season. Also joining me is RJ O'Connell. How's it going, big man?
I find it very appropriate that we're talking about fighting games as we are racing in the home of Evolution Championships 2025. And I guess every year before that there's ever been an Evo tournament in the United States. Happy Thanksgiving to all who celebrate in the United States. By the time you're listening to this, it'll already be Thanksgiving holiday or it may have already passed. If you're one of those folks who just looks at this as just another bank holiday in late November, hey, that's cool too. Enjoy yourselves. Enjoy yourselves however you're doing it. Also, please don't go crazy on the post-Thanksgiving shopping.
Ooh.
I will be working it.
Good luck.
Thank you.
I'm going to be split.
I will be doing nothing but make more podcasts because I'm British. We don't celebrate that here, annoyingly. I wish I had another excuse to stuff my face in the middle of November, but unfortunately, that's not possible.
Yeah, Dre's body has been converted at this point to a machine that just puts out podcasts.
Yeah, pretty much at this point. It's a tough job, but it's a dirty role, but somebody's got to do it. But yeah, on this episode of Motorsport 101, we're going to be talking a lot of catching up, i.e., we got a new race director. That's a big one. We got the big breaking news of Monday morning where we found out that, yes, in the biggest U-turn seen from space, Formula One has approved Cadillac provisionally to join the F1 grid in 2026. So we'll be breaking down all the nuances of that very, very shortly. Oh, and we've had the second coming of Las Vegas as a Grand Prix as well, where Max Verstappen would put a lid on it and seal his fourth consecutive world championship. Oh, and George Russell won, by the way. That was pretty neat.
We didn't see a whole lot of him. He got pole, he took off, and we never saw him again.
That was it. Game over. We'll talk about that a little bit more, as well as some Ferrari beef, the battle for sixth, Aston Martin having a reshuffle, and Alpine's exploding. It's been a hell of a week.
Literally and figuratively.
Captain, it's Wednesday. Places you can find this real quick. We're on youtube.com/motorsport101. We're on facebook.com/motorsport101. You can find us on Elon Musk's failed business investments at motorsport_101. If you want to follow our personal handles, you can at Dre Harrison101, at RJ O'Connell, and C Buckley 917. You can check out some bonus thoughts on everything to do with this race weekend on the website as well. Check out the blog section at motorsport101.com. Check that out from me. And of course, if you really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon. Patreon.com/motorsport101. $5 gets you early access to all of our content. Upgrade to the $10 tier to get access to these episodes as soon as they're being recorded, as well as getting to the supporters club of our Discord server. We got Mike and Jason doing that right now. Shout out to my new Patreon backer, Galarian Mike, as well. Thank you for joining us, buddy.
Thank you for giving us money. It helps us do cool stuff. Also, if you wanna follow us on Not a Cesspit, we are also, I'm pretty sure all three of us now on good Twitter, the Blue Sky.
We are on Blue Sky, indeed. I'm at dreharrison.bsky.social. RJ O'Connell is exactly as he would spell his name, and C. Buckley still minus his vowels.
Plus the 917.
Plus the 917. The most important part of the username, of course. The 917 is still there. Love that for you.
Also, M101 Awards.
Yes.
Voting is still open until the 15th of December, one day before my birthday. Now that the Formula One champion is decided, you may have extra incentive to go and actually make your nominations. Because, we might talk a little bit about how dead rubber these last two races are.
We still have a Constructors' Championship to battle for. We all care about that as fans, right? Okay, fair enough. Check out the pinned tweet on our Twitter account, motorsport_101. I will be exclusively revealing my ballot next weekend. Maybe as a little help to guide you in the right direction. Please vote on the M101 Awards, as RJ quite poetically alluded to. December 15th is the deadline. Thank you very much indeed. Without further ado, after this quick musical interlude, let's talk about... Here comes the new challenger!
Well, we did it. We did it. What the fuck is a kilometer? It's the biggest story of the year. We never thought it would happen, but it's now confirmed that Andretti Global is set to get its spot on the grid after all, but not as we know it. With General Motors rumored to take majority control of the bid, and with less Andretti branding featured, company CEO Dan Tauris, who, as you know, recently bought a majority share of Andretti Global from Michael Andretti, has broken the impasse with Formula One management. An announcement has been made on Monday that the Cadillac Formula One team will join the grid in 2026. They will start with customer engines from a number of suppliers. Pretty much Ferrari is rumored to be the favorites at this point until Cadillac's in-house power unit program is up and running by 2028. And I'm reminded of the words of the great film actor Kevin Garnett, who once said, "Anything's possible. Anything's possible." Finally, it's over. It's done. We can stop the fucking nonsense, man. We have an 11th team.
Well, you see, it wasn't the prize money sharing. It wasn't the delusion. It was fuck Michael Andretti in particular.
Yeah.
That's really what it boiled down to.
And look, normally, we as fans, as a collective, are pretty stupid. I make no bones about admitting this, right? Normally, these sorts of japes and jokes, it's like when Red Bull broke the cost cap in 2021. Everybody thought it was the catering because that was the funny joke, when it was actually the gardening leave they had to pay to Dan Fallows. More on him later. But see, that's foreshadowing. But in this sense, normally there's a real legitimate reason and we just come up with a funny one. No, this is literally what happened, because if you read between the lines on a lot of this process and negotiations, apparently Dan Tauris was in Vegas this past weekend, sat down with Greg Maffei and all the other bosses. Now, it's also worth pointing out, we haven't mentioned it on the show, Greg Maffei is also stepping down as CEO of Liberty Media at the end of the year, funnily enough.
That's Greg Maffei, who once went up to Mario Andretti, butted in the middle of a conversation, and told Mario to his face, "I will do everything in my power to make sure your son doesn't get on the grid." Well, now is Greg Maffei's potential last big act as Formula One CEO, Liberty Media CEO, he's going to let Michael Andretti on the grid. Kind of. Mario Andretti is going to serve the role of what Richard Petty serves at Legacy Motors Club, i.e., ceremonial figurehead. This is pretty much the Andretti bid under a different name, a flashier name in the eyes of some. This bid has its origins going back all the way to their formal application in 2022. Before that, they tried to purchase what we now know as Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber. And now But if you really think about it, all this goes back to Zach Veach having a chat with his pastor because he really needed to raise some money to get up from Indy Lights to Indy Next. And so his pastor told him about a man named Dan Towers, who eventually became a sponsor of Andretti Autosport and is now the majority owner of Andretti Global and practically the owner of this new team.
And for anyone under any delusions, because let's be real here, and I'll get to more about this in a minute, Michael Andretti is not blameless for all of this. He originally told the media he didn't sell the team, and now we found out due to IndyCar's charter system that Dan Towers is the majority owner of Andretti Global because legally speaking, anyone with more than 10% ownership in the team would have to have their name be on IndyCar's charters. Michael Andretti's name is not on them. So he has clearly sold the team. And now that he is gone, this negotiation was apparently very quick. Sat down one weekend, thrashed out a deal, and now within 3 days, it's official.
I said at the time when that change of ownership came down, like this had nothing to do with Michael Andretti being mildly critical of Penske Entertainment handling IndyCar. This was all a last-ditch effort to try and get that Cadillac F1 program over the line.
Look, the man, now we know the full story. The man clearly fell on his grenade. He clearly wanted to get this team over the line, and the only way he could do it was sacrificing himself at the altar. And you know what? Fair enough if that's the case. But it just cements to me more than anything else that everybody involved in this is petty as shit.
Yeah, all of the legal arguments that Formula One management put forth over the last year, complete nonsense.
You try to tell us that every track didn't have the facilities to accommodate more than 20 cars. Bro, what? Even I could tell that's
just an objective lie because of what you need to be in order to have grade 1 status. But even
13 garage slots. Yeah.
Exactly. The amount of investment from GM isn't really changing. It's still Andretti Global underneath. Mm-hmm. And they're still going to be running customer engines for at least the first 2 years when they arrive in Formula One. It literally was just not wanting Michael Andretti involved and not wanting the Andretti name above the garage. Because when you peel the Cadillac badge off, it's still Andretti Global.
Which I'm fine. My whole stance in this has been like, I don't care short of, this being run by the Mazepin regime or some right-wing grifter like Vivek Ramaswamy. God, could you imagine a Doge Formula One team?
A white ring.
Short of any of that shit.
Mario Andretti, unfortunately.
Yeah. To that point, General Motors did donate to Project 2025, so there's no high moral ground there. But what I am saying is that, as long as it's a credible entry, I just want to see more teams, more people finding work, more drivers getting a chance to showcase their skills at the Formula One level. And unless somebody else catastrophically pulls the plug between now and the start of 2026, we're going to get that. Finally, this is all I've been asking for.
Yeah, because once those conditions were met, it appears Liberty did kind of realize, very highly funded brand with rich motorsport history. Maybe that will be good for us.
They knew what that was in the first place. We knew exactly what this is. We're like stop. This is not directed at you, Cam, but stop trying to pull the wool over our fucking eyes here. We're not stupid. You just didn't like Michael Andretti. Call it what it is, okay? And you 100%. Know what? To be fair, he did not do himself any favors at times. I need to stress this. Michael Andretti is not blameless in this scenario.
Running around the paddock with a petition. Hey, sign this so I can get into the sport.
Dog, I respect the hustle.
I respect
the hustle, but not the execution.
I respect the hustle, but that was mad disrespectful. You don't just stroll into somebody's paddock and hand them paper saying, tell these guys that we bring value here. Like, it pissed off
Especially
everybody.
when the guys signing the petition are the guys you're trying to convince.
Like, and then going to the media, running to the media and telling them that they're all greedy bastards. Like, how well did you think that was going to go down? Honestly, don't get me wrong.
Look, you're not wrong.
He's not wrong,
but he's not playing the game. You got to play the game sometimes.
You've got to play the game a little bit better. You got to
work within the system, Austin. But the problem is Michael Andretti just envisioned himself giving stone cold stunners to everybody.
And that's not how this works. And that's why within weeks of that happening, Stefano Domenicali put him on blast. And then, if anything, Andretti doubled down by going to Congress, sitting down and saying, hey, sue the bastards. You know,
Which,
again,
in fairness,
how did you think?
Definitely will have been a factor in this.
Oh,
absolutely.
Because Liberty Media is looking at a antitrust lawsuit in their own backyard between Live Nation and Ticketmaster. And then they're also looking over their other shoulder and seeing this legal battle between NASCAR and the two uncharted teams, 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports in particular. And they're realizing, you know, if we keep pushing this envelope, so our WhatsApp group chats are going to get leaked.
But here's the thing. F1 won. They got the Andretti camp to back down. That was the whole point. You got the man you didn't like involved in this to stand down, and you still get to keep the luxury of the more famous Andretti being a part of the team in a non-executive Niki Lauda-esque role. Everybody wins here.
Which is why it's going to be hilarious when they name Michael Andretti as team principal.
Holy. I mean, that would be an incredible ruse, but I'm generally
absolutely livid if that were to go down. It would be very funny, but they'd immediately be sued.
I don't know, man. They let Flavio Briatore in the back door like crazy.
Can you sue over the appointment of a team principal? He's just an employee.
F1 would find a way.
In general, I'm happy. I'm happy, and I know that there are going to be people who felt like this should have been Michael's from start to finish. There are going to be some people who feel that like Formula One doesn't want America just its money. I get it. I understand that. I realize we've always been trying to fight for respect at the Formula One table up until recently. I get it. I understand it. But what I really wanted was just another competent team on the grid to make this sport more competitive. We don't know if this Cadillac team is going to end up like a success out of the box, midfield out of the box. It could be terrible and fold before 2028. God, I sure hope not. But
I would kind of expect it to be, but at the same time, this is not the General Motors of 25 years ago that entered LMP 900 for a cup of coffee, got demolished, and then left after 2 years as they were getting the car right. This is a GM that's willing to spend a genuinely unholy sum of money to be competitive. And we've seen that across pretty much everywhere that they are involved. And they have a tremendous amount of performance engineers and resources to pool. Their own internal, just on the engine side, themselves, their NASCAR teams, Gilmore in the UK. I'm sure all of them are going to be called up to work on this. In addition to...
They're recruiting like crazy for this.
Yeah, and this is a team, it's only still a couple hundred people actually in the F1 program. They're going to need to at least quintuple in size just to get to the size of Haas, who are the minnows size-wise of Formula One.
Haas has only got 300 employees. They need to be at 1,000 to be competing with the big boys, really.
They need to be at a couple thousand, and they will be. And then we'll see how they come in on the chassis side come 2026, and then we'll see what they do on the power unit side.
The blessing for Andretti here is that they can work on the 2026 cars right now. And they've been doing that right now because they have access to Toyota's wind tunnel over in Cologne. So they've never stopped working despite the failed negotiations that have come up to this point. And the Andretti camp always assumed they would get on the grid eventually, and they have. So they've kept the wheels turning in that time since then, and now this is just really the last hurdle in the way that's now been cleared, and now they can open the taps and go crazy on this. Yeah. I'm as a fan, I'm obviously great. I'm delighted. I'm excited. I'm glad we just have another team. I think the whole politics of this was bullshit from day one. It was always based on the provision that what if the money stopped rolling in? If you're a stakeholder in F1, why the fuck would you think the money's going to dry up when you've had unprecedented levels of growth since Liberty Media bought the sport 8 years ago?
Unprecedented levels of growth at a time when everybody thinks that dominance from Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen is going to kill the sport.
Well, you see, Dre, the turkeys did vote for Thanksgiving as long as one certain guy wasn't at the table eating with them.
It's bullshit. And
imagine that. Imagine that. We get lied to about the voting inclinations of a group of people in November 2024. It's crazy.
It's dumb as shit, and we let 10 months of protracted negotiations go to complete waste over one man's management of the bid. And don't get me wrong, like I said earlier, Michael Andretti did not help himself in any way, shape, or form in this process. But ultimately, you should look past that and realize this is objectively a great thing for Formula One. This is the market that you've been desperate to crack for the last half decade. You went from 1 US Grand Prix to 3 almost overnight. You now have 5 races in North and Central America. You now have the biggest car manufacturer in the United States, the third biggest in the world, with a factory team and a genuine American influence in your sport directly. Sorry, Haas. This is objectively a win for Formula One, and the dumbest thing about it was that it took the better part of a year of negotiations to get this sorted. Do you know how dumb everybody looks here when Mohammed Ben Sulayem was the voice of reason? Think about that.
That he put his entire campaign upon this. He made it a fucking crusade to try and get GM on the grid, and FOM dragged this out for a year just to say F you to him as well.
And it took the United States government's Department of Justice looking over their shoulder for them to finally back down, but not before F1 got what it wanted and got the annoying one out of the way. In a way, everybody got what they wanted in the end, but man, it was dumb as shit how we got there.
And again, I would not be shocked whatsoever if Michael finds a way to be a part of the day-to-day at the team itself.
I wouldn't be surprised either. I mean, there's a lot we'll talk about Cadillac ramping up the program to 2026, including who's going to drive for them, who's going to be available to drive for them.
I would tend to, I would think there's one driver who's probably a shoo-in if he can get the super license.
Don't put that burden on him just yet.
Oh,
we saw this played out before he wanted Toronto.
Oh boy, I can't wait to go to Formula One to display my incredible speed and strategy.
Boy,
fuck you.
I'm surrounded by America. I thought you guys were talking about Carl Kirkwood.
Carlos Sainz wrong. You are wrong in Auto Nation Pink.
Does Carlos Sainz Jr. have an exit clause for 2026? Asking for a friend.
Yes.
With the way he's burning bridges.
Yeah, he does actually. He has a break clause after the second year of his contract. Just for just a thought. Just a thought. Throwing that out there. We'll talk more about drivers maybe in our season review or something along those lines and see where we're at. And because more will come out about this obviously between now and 2026. The drivers are an interesting part of that tale. All I'm saying is the Colton Herta argument is a lot easier to make given he got 30 super license points by finishing his championship runner-up this year. Makes the math a lot friendlier. Trust me. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the year, but for now, thank God that's over. Speaking of thank God that's over, we have a new world champion. Wait,
the same as the old world champion.
Yes, Max Verstappen finished the Las Vegas Grand Prix in 5th. It didn't matter because Lando Norris was directly behind him in 6th place, and that was all that Max Verstappen needed. The maths just said finish ahead of Lando, and that will do it, and that's exactly what happened. Verstappen came home 5th behind the 2 Mercedes and the 2 Ferraris. More on them later. Max Verstappen is your 2024 Formula One World Champion. I mean, I wouldn't say it felt inevitable. There was obviously a good chunk of this season where we thought, is he going to hang on to this? Because obviously McLaren absolutely were a threat, and McLaren absolutely were taking points out of Max's lead until roughly Cota, where it all just went belly up for McLaren pretty quickly. But now it's sunk in a little bit. Supermax with a 4 instead of the A. How are we feeling, gents?
Well, it's exactly as we all predicted, but not at all in the way that it actually played out. You won't be able to say he didn't work for it this year. He had to dig very deep compared to really the last 2 championships. And if I were to sum it up in one word, I would say relentless. When he had the car to do it, he won. When he didn't, he got pretty much everything he could, bar a couple of messy weekends. And up against a McLaren that just was not equipped to go hunting for a world championship. And they displayed that at least half a dozen times this year. We talked a little bit about it on the MotoGP episode with Martin and Bagnaia, but when you keep leaving the door open, you open yourself up to the counterpunch. And in this instance, Max stemmed the bleeding enough where he was probably going to be all right. And then McLaren gave him an opening and he punched their heads off in Brazil.
It almost reminds me more of the Tyson Paul fight, where Jake Paul could easily just knock that 58-year-old man over and just didn't want to throw a punch.
Because why risk anything when the money's already secured? Sorry, was that a jab? That was already more.
That's a jab. That's a good boxing reference. Am I right, folks?
There was like 3 layers.
Like and subscribe.
3 layers of reference there.
Oh yeah, I can go deep on this. It's beautiful.
We proved, this proves that this isn't just the car.
No.
Like, do not get me wrong. Last year's Red Bull was
debatably the greatest Formula One car ever developed.
But we see the gulf between Verstappen and Perez. This ain't all the car.
Yeah, and even beyond that, when Red Bull was dominant to start the year, you think, oh, it's just a repeat of last year. And
there's a reason why we didn't do predictions for who is going to be world champion. It was all just understood. We know how this goes.
And for the first 5 or 6 races, it looked that way. And then McLaren brings a complete reset on their car to Miami, and they win the first time out. They needed a little bit of help to do it, but it proved to not be a fluke. Max had to soak up enormous pressure in Imola, enormous pressure in Spain. He had to be perfect in Canada. And beyond just the opening stands of the season where Max was just putting boots to asses every weekend by 15, 20 seconds, it was that second quarter where McLaren walked through the door as a threat, and Max is still clutching out wins. He's still taking those poles back on lap 1 and running away and guarding against Lando. That's where he did an enormous amount of damage this season, because if you start the season in Miami, he's still the championship leader.
This very much felt like 2009 to me, if we want to compare it to a world championship campaign that's relatable. The parallels, I think, are actually very similar. In 2009, and you can find out more about that because the Brawn docuseries with Keanu Reeves is now on BBC iPlayer for you Brits out there. Go watch.
I do need to interject. That's Toyota Gazoo Racing GR Cup North America legend Keanu Reeves.
That's Shadow the Hedgehog to you and me. But yes, that's available now on BBC iPlayer for you Brits. So if you go watch it, if you haven't already, if you can't afford a Disney Plus subscription, because what the fuck would you give them money? Anyway, but yeah, it reminded me a lot of 2009 when the parallels are similar. JB, Jenson Button won 6 out of the first 7 that year. In the same way in a very similar way that Max Verstappen won 5 out of the first 7 this year, probably would have had 6 if it wasn't for his brake failure in Australia. And then when, as Cam alluded to, when McLaren rolled up with their reset car in Miami, that was really the first indication that McLaren had finally cracked the mountaintop and actually had a great car. Max surviving that initial wave of pressure And then getting to really like the third quarter of the season where everybody just kind of tripped over each other. Charles Leclerc winning in Monaco, Mercedes being hodded and fish greased to go into the summer break when they won 3 out of 4 in that period in between, and then getting past the summer break, going back out towards Asia. Max just trying to limit the pain as much as he could until the final stanza, and that was Kota, the key race where he finished ahead of Lando and put the run rate up into double digits. And of course, the counterpunch that landed around the world in Brazil, arguably Verstappen's greatest drive, the one that killed this championship off entirely. It's a story where the only real constant in this season was Max Verstappen's consistency. If you take out the Australia DNF, he hasn't finished a Grand Prix lower than 6th this year. He's not had very many bad days. He's not had very many days where Lando was able to take a punch out of him. Lando only took 12 points out of a race weekend on Max once all year, and that was Australia, the one DNF on Max's record this season.
Yeah, and that third quarter, right? Because that's where Max actually got kind of messy. He had a couple weekends where he just did not get everything there was to get. Hungary was a mess. Belgium, they took an engine penalty. He whacked the field by over half a second in qualifying, and he couldn't use it. He still beat Lando, though, because Lando went wide at turn 1.
USA and Mexico were pretty sketchy. I'm going to be real.
But USA worked. Mexico, less so. Bush league for Max.
2 out of 3 times Max went over the limit on racecraft. He came out better for it. Say what you will about the way he got there, you can't say it wasn't effective.
But even then, but my point is, during that third quarter, McLaren were dicking around.
Absolutely, they were dicking around.
Way too many times between Piastri and Lando, between not knowing, like even in Singapore when Lando ran the field over, he almost crashed out of the lead.
Twice. It was
no pressure.
It was messy. McLaren's execution leaves a lot to be desired. And look, I know a lot of people have leaned on the excuse that this is a team that needs to learn how to win. I say that's bullshit, personally. This is a team that's had people in that organization that have been there from the 2012 V8 era when Hamilton was a genuine title contender a couple of times at the turn of the decade. Some people were there during the proper Ron Dennis era when they were a championship team in the mid-2000s. This is no excuse. You've been setting yourself up for this season for the last 3 or 4 years.
What was the tagline coming into the season, Dre?
Whatever it takes.
Well, you didn't do that. You didn't even come close. We raked Ferrari over the fucking coals in 2017 and 2018 for blowing title chances, and those cars weren't this McLaren.
And McLaren and Ferrari have one other thing in common. They've both gone over a decade and a half since they last won a championship.
It's probably going to change this year on the constructors' side.
Well, yeah, one of them has to win it.
Yeah, because it ain't going to be Red Bull with a one-car team at this point.
Well, you never know. One of them could be. Both of them could inflict some sort of like technical or sporting breach that gets them both thrown out of the Constructors' Championship. You never know.
That would be very funny.
It would be very funny, but unlikely. The point I'm getting at here is, and give this one, Cam, for just a second here, is that McLaren have been setting up for the first sign that they might have something was 2020 when they finished third in the constructors during the COVID season. That was the first sign for me that they actually had something here with the Zach Brown era. And they've been building up, back up the ladder again. We saw glimpses of what this car could be last year towards the end of the season when they weren't all that far behind Red Bull towards the back end of last season.
There were instances where they were straight up quicker over a lap as they just didn't have Red Bull's obnoxious race pace.
And the combination of having Max Verstappen in the seats. And the reset was what got them over the hill. This is what McLaren had been building up for the better part of half a decade, and in the end, they failed. They failed.
They maximized more last year when they had a distant second best car than what they did this year when they had, for at least a dozen rounds, a car capable of a race win or a podium. There were races where they were 4th and 5th.
All I'm saying is they better win the Constructors. They have a 24-point lead with 2 rounds to go. At least if they win the Constructors, you can't call this season a failure, because that ultimately is the ultimate aim. You want the prize money. You want the Constructors Championship. That's what you're really here for. I know us as fans will always care most about the driver standings, but the Constructors is why we're really here. McLaren needs to win that. They need to close this out. I think they will, because they were very strong in Qatar last year. That's the next race we're going to this weekend. But if you fuck up one more time and you let Ferrari in through the back door, I am going to destroy them on this podcast at the end of the season. I will tear them limb from limb because you don't
it off, right?
You don't purge your social media. You don't go and sign Oscar Piastri and tie him down for 3 years. You don't build your entire brand around Lando Norris if you're not thinking this is the one. This is the lineup that's going to get you over the top.
Counted it off, right? Because I'm counting from Miami, and they did not have a race win capable car every single race since. They could have won, I would say, at least. They had a capable car in 11 races. They won 5. And one of them was kind of sort of fluky with how Miami played out, with Max shattering his floor over the curb. And even when they didn't have a race win capable situation, I mean, in Spa, there is no conceivable way that Lando should have finished behind Max that race.
None. Unacceptable. Piastri was very unlucky not to win that race.
Yeah. And just, it's almost pointless to point out individual situations because a lot of people are going to go back to Hungary and the team order situation. There's like 24 different things that you can name with McLaren as to how they lost this drivers' championship. We're also going to be in a situation where right now the World Constructors is between a team that has had a distant second best car in Ferrari, distant second best or god awful in the middle of the year, and then swung back right at the end, or a car that's been at least race win capable for half the season.
None of this is good.
None of this is very weird. This is a very weird F1 season.
People told me that the MCL 38 was faster than the RB 19, and now this so-called rocket ship now has exactly one more win than the current Mercedes W15. Would anybody call this car a rocket ship?
Might be the worst car to ever win 4 races.
You realize we have 7 drivers that have won multiple Grands Prix this season?
First time that's ever happened in F1 history. We've had 7 multiple winners in the same year.
Predict that ship earlier in the season?
4 teams. No. The first time ever that all the 4 manufacturers have had a 1-2 finish in the same season. The shit is wild. This is a weird shit
season. Sergio Perez wasn't ultra ass.
I know, right? Like,
might have 8.
I want to swing this back to Max because this is more about him than it is about McLaren and Ferrari's failures. Yeah. We are now, like, Max is now, if anyone doesn't have him in their top 10 all time, they are, for me, wrong. They are just wrong. This is like this might be a hot take. This might be the greatest 4-year run I've ever seen in Formula One. Like, 2021, he beats Prime Lewis in a similar performance level of car that swung back and forth across 2021. Yes, we didn't have to talk about how he won it. I don't care what you think of how that season ended. Max was worthy enough to have won that world title if the chips fell his way. That was a 10-win season against Lewis Hamilton head-to-head. 2022, 15-win season, dominates the year, wins by over 150 points. 2023, possibly the greatest individual single season ever seen in F1. And 2024, he's likely won the world title in arguably the 3rd best car. What?
I mean, the last situation, like, on the year, yeah. The last one I can think of like that is, for me, Schumacher's greatest title, 1995, where anyone in the know would tell you the Benetton didn't have a patch on the Williams that year, and he destroyed Williams.
Maybe this is why Damon Hill empathizes with Lando Norris so much.
Damn.
Because he was on the other end of the... Yeah, he was on the receiving end of a similar answer because even I remember watching ITV coverage when F1 just came around there in like the late 90s, and I distinctively remember Schumacher was already getting GOAT arguments in the late 90s because people knew, despite some of the bullshit he pulled on track, he's the best driver in the world. And we're now getting to that point with Max where we all know the one fan base, maybe two, that will deny this. But if you think Max Verstappen is not the best driver in the world right now, then I'm sorry. I don't think there's an argument you can make anymore. I had to
listen to my two podcast co-hosts who are both big Sebastian Vettel fans, including the big one, the big boss, saying this is a better run than Vettel ever had. Yeah, and that's not to say that Sebastian Vettel's legacy is completely erased. Do not get it twisted, hot take merchants on either good or bad Twitter.
Look, different drivers went about it differently, but just the sheer inevitability of Verstappen seemingly every weekend. It's the only time Vettel was just like, you just knew he was going to roll the field over. It was probably 2011. And the second half of 13, where 2011, it almost didn't matter what happened. Vettel would just win the race, disappear up the road, and never be seen again. In this case, especially last year, because the Red Bull, even at its most dominant, is not really a qualifying car.
No,
he would have to go carving up the field. And the thing is with Max is that he can turn it on or off if he wants to. If he can race you clean, he'll race you clean. We see that with Charles Leclerc all the time. If he needs to slap that Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec disc into the PS2,
he'll do it.
Well, you can't argue with the results.
It's people want to pretend like this is just like brain fade. Like, I'm not going to pretend.
It's the opposite. He knows what he's doing because Formula One, as we talked about a few races ago, they applied a black and white ruling to something that is inherently gray. If they decide tomorrow that you can't rush the apex to be ahead at the corner and be entitled to the corner, Max will just race the way that they write it in the rules.
Yeah. I find it amazing to have to say, but amazingly, I don't think a 4-time world champion with 62 career wins is still phoning it in at this point. That man knows exactly what he's doing, and let's be real with each other here. Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher are revered as Formula One gods for being exactly the same way.
I say, as a Nico Rosberg fan, yeah. Well, he was on the outside, so it's my corner.
Right. Like, call it what it is. Max plays to the rules and beyond them better than anyone has done in the modern era. He's prepared to take those liberties.
That Mount Rushmore, which, by the way, is complete nonsense because it doesn't have Fangio or Prost on it, that's been going around the last couple of days. You know what?
Nonsense.
You know what all four of those drivers have in common? Absolute jackasses behind the wheel.
Absolutely. They all knew exactly what they were doing. That was the ruthlessness needed to be a world champion. And trust me, I sit in the Autosport office like 3 or 4 times a week. I know what gets said about Verstappen behind closed doors. And people say, he doesn't need to do this. He doesn't have to do this because he's so good. He did have to do it this year because Lando Norris had a faster car than him for 2/3 of this season. He was prepared to go over that line, and while I don't necessarily agree with it, I understand why he did it, and it worked. He might not get so lucky next time, but I need to stress, this man is a genius. He's incredible.
And this weekend, right, if you wanted to boil the whole season down, Red Bull does not have a true low downforce rear wing.
No, they haven't really needed one up until recently.
They won Monza last year with medium downforce, which is complete malarkey.
They don't call it the Honda Motor Company for nothing. But this looked like the weekend it was in trouble. They were hacksawing the rear wing down.
They brought their cut Monza wing. They were getting just whacked in a straight line by everybody. So they take a Dremel tool to the top flap of the wing, which basically means their DRS doesn't really work all that well. They're completely out of the window until the end of FP3. Max whacks it on the second row. Ahead of Lando, and Lando never even saw him.
Yeah, if you want a microcosm of the 2024 season, that's a pretty good way of describing it. For me, just to put a neat little bow on this segment, you are dealing with one of the greatest of all time, in my opinion, at the very peak of his powers. He is the best driver in the world. I think he's a top 6 driver that's ever walked this earth. He's better than Seb. I got no problem admitting that. As a card-carrying member of the Sebastian Vettel fraternity, he's better than Seb. I got no problem admitting that. The guy is unbelievable. He is a special, special talent. Like, you know what he is? He could end up being the LeBron James of this sport. The guy that had more hype than maybe any other prospect has ever had coming into this sport and then actually delivering in every conceivable
Going beyond
way.
it. Like, for those who are not inclined, LeBron James was called the chosen one before he ever played an NBA game.
He had $90 million. He had $90 million of shoe endorsements before he'd even played a minute in the NBA.
I have a pair of those up there. They're wonderful. Like, if he came in and he was not a first ballot Hall of Famer, he would have been a bust. And he exceeded that. And that's what we're seeming to watch right now with Max. You wouldn't have called him being a not when he came in, not in the midst of the crushing iron grip that Mercedes had on the sport when he arrived. He's the one who broke that and then took it even further.
He's incredible. He's unbelievable. He is special. And even with Red Bull sitting around openly admitting this might not happen again next year, Pierre Wache said it on Monday, we're not sure we can do this again. You've got to figure they have a chance purely because they know how good Verstappen is. He is worth 100 points on his own.
You know, I actually Pierre Vaca, I actually like the approach that he's taking. Of we can't have confidence going into next year. We need to pull out all the stops. Because another thing as well, and this is a huge component of this, is Red Bull stopping the bleeding around Baku. That they went back into the wind tunnel, they figured out where their correlation went wrong, and they didn't fix the car. The car is not fixed. It is still a bit tricky to drive, a bit peaky to drive.
Yeah.
But they stemmed the bleeding enough where Max could get the car underneath him and go do his thing. And as soon as they did, he did. If you give him the tools, there's no one better right now. It is as simple as that.
It really is as simple as that. And we'll see what next year brings to the table. Red Bull are humble. They've been humbled this year. They're going to lose their Constructors' Championship almost certainly. Max has got away with it this year by sheer force of will to bring home the drivers, but this is a team that does need to bounce back next year, no question, because McLaren is a threat right now. Ferrari is a threat right now. Mercedes aren't a million miles behind. They are peaky, but they are fast.
No. Drop the air temperature to 4 degrees Celsius and Mercedes will run the table next year.
Yeah, which goes to show you they're peaky, but they're not a million miles away. They can win on merit on a good day. You know, you don't fluke 4 wins in a season in Formula One. So, and then some talk of the devil, it was a 1-2 finish for Mercedes this weekend. George Russell in particular, Mercedes topped every single session in Vegas over the course of the weekend, qualified on pole, led every single lap but one in the end. George Russell had a 10-second lead by the end of the first stint of racing and didn't really look back. He took the win, his 4th win of his career, his 2nd win of the season. And Lewis Hamilton, who qualified poorly in 10th, had to come through the field but did so to finish in 2nd. Mercedes finished 1 and 2, as I mentioned earlier. It's the 4th time a team has finished 1 and 2, the 4th different team to finish 1 and 2 in an F1 race this season. First time that's ever happened in the sport's 75-year history. Carlos Sainz would wrap up the podium in 3rd. What the hell made Mercedes so goddamn fast this weekend?
He went to the Comeback Panda Express on the Strip. Shout out Spencer Hall, who popularized the Comeback Panda Express. Franco Colapinto was really, really needing that after his qualifying crash, but Mercedes, they embodied the spirit of coming back, guns a-blazing. We were all wondering when this was going to stop during the free practices. And it didn't.
I called it. I got laughed out of the room by supporter of the show, Sasha. I'm like, I think Mercedes is going to be on pole. And not only were they, like, they turned back the clock. Mercedes looked unfucking beatable around here.
I knew Leclerc wasn't going to win because Aubrey Graham put a $300,000 bet on.
Oh my God. The Drake curse extending to Formula One.
Only his second biggest sell of the week.
Amazing. Like, I imagine losing $210,000 worth of Bitcoin, and that wasn't the biggest L you've taken this week.
My God. Well, what's more powerful? A car that's fast, but you don't understand why, or a car that's slow, but you understand? Well, in Mercedes' case, the former. I mean, Russell, aforementioned, got on pole, was never seen again. He kept it at turn one and just disappeared.
It was a professional ass beating.
Yeah, like
Lewis, on the other hand, Lewis was poor in the first stint, got onto the hards, and it was like he just fucking came barreling through the field. No one could defend against him.
Very, this is such a weird car. I mean, we talked about it earlier in the season around Zandvoort kind of time when the team openly admitted they've struggled with the temperature-based variance and performance of their car and how they manage their tires. The hotter it gets, the more difficulty they have trying to deal with that tire wear and deal with that thermal degradation. Vegas was ice cold. The track temperature was 4 degrees Celsius. It's the coldest track I think I can ever remember in Formula One. I can't ever remember a track being that cold. You might as well be driving on ice.
Yeah, when the track is cold, and we've seen that in wet conditions this year. George Russell in Brazil put it on pole. No, he didn't put it on pole. He was in second. He might as well put it on pole the way Lando started that race. Running theme this year. But back in Silverstone, cold. Mercedes were very fast. Lewis won the race. It's just something about the Mercedes, the way it gets its performance to the ground. It only really works in cold conditions. But when they do, they've got a car.
It's fast. No arguing there.
Ferrari couldn't get their tires up to temperature. McLaren were out to sea all weekend. In the clutch, McLaren came up woefully short. And now their championship lead in the constructors is starting to be heavily cut by Ferrari. And
was 36 and now 24.
Which happens to be the exact run rate that Ferrari need.
Yeah, and they're tied on points, but McLaren right now, so they're tied on race wins, but Ferrari does not have the tiebreaker because McLaren has more second place finishes than Ferrari. They both won the same number of Grand Prix. They both have 5 wins on the year, but McLaren's got more second places. So right now, they basically have a 24 and a half point leads, I like to say, because they have the tiebreaker.
I suspect that number of race wins between that two team is not done going up. On either side of that equation.
Qatar's going to be big, I reckon.
Especially with the sprint weekend as well.
That could tip it. And my general rule of thumb on that is that I think McLaren will win in Qatar, but I think Ferrari will be stronger in Abu Dhabi. That's my general thoughts.
They've been strong the last 2 years there. Yeah, strong relative to where Red Bull have been.
Could go down to the wire. I think it could be on the day in Abu Dhabi where positions shake out. But
McLaren as well. They figured it out in the last stint in terms of the way Lando could drive the car, how he could drive the car to get the lap times. But by that point, it was over. Max was
too late.
10 seconds off the road. There's nothing they could do.
Max was 10 seconds off the road. Oscar Piastri was nowhere this weekend. He was completely
like off of Lando pretty much all week. A huge relative to where that's been all season. That's a pretty big delta between those two because
Norris came in for a fastest lap attempt at the end of the race and still came out 4 seconds in front of Piastri.
Not great.
That's an arse whipping.
And all of these people must be happier than Ferrari because Ferrari maximized everything that there was to get, and they pissed off everyone in the team to do it.
Except for Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz was perfectly happy to take that podium finish. Charles Leclerc did not have a good day. He dropped off so badly on his first stint that we thought his car was breaking, as Pierre Gasly's would do. It turns out it was fine. The tires were just shot, but he was not happy after the race.
RJ, that was some 2012 levels of Pirelli cliff that he hit. He was all over. He was all over Russell, and then suddenly lost like 2.5 seconds a lap.
Yeah, I thought his car had like an MGUK failure or something, but as it turns out, no, it was just the tires. But he ends up finishing at 4th. And Dre, he unloads on the radio.
Yeah, like the last time I saw Charles Leclerc, that angle was in Paul Ricard, but he just saw an android get smashed in the face. If you know, you know. But if you listen to his post-race radio, this is literally word for word what he said. Quote, "Yeah, I did my job, but being nice fucking fucks me over all the fucking time. All the fucking time. It's not even being nice, it's just being respectful. I know I need to shut up, but at one point it's always the same, so... Yeah, and Fred Vassar had to intervene and say, Charles, calm down.
We should beep that for effect in post.
Do you know how much effort that's going to be?
Oh my God. Yeah. Here's the thing, right? Ferrari made it very clear to Carlos Sainz, your services are not needed for 2025. Why do they keep running race strategies that depend on him complying with team orders?
Because everybody thinks Carlos Sainz is this amazing race engineer-based strategist when he's not. He's a Goldilocks driver. And I like Carlos Sainz, but Ferrari are being hopelessly naive about this. When you told that man in January that your services were no longer required, you are not going to expect him to play ball, okay? He's in it for himself. He's in it to put himself in the shop window for 2026 when he inevitably breaks off his deal with Williams when he realizes how crap they are. Like call a spade on this one. Carlos owes that team nothing. And when that happens, you are going to play the game his way. And Charles, again, and I love Charles. He's the faster driver. I mean, let's not forget here, right? Charles Leclerc is 60 points ahead of Carlos Sainz in the championship this year. Charles Leclerc has beaten that ass. For all these people that want to come out and say that Carlos Sainz deserves better, no. Carlos Sainz has been spanked this year by Charles Leclerc again. And I need to point this out. Charles has got to stop being so naive about this. Everybody at Ferrari got to stop being so naive about this because he's pulled your pants down and he's giving you a reach around. Like what? Like Charles.
This has been happening in Vegas a lot.
Oh Lord! This is like the 3rd or 4th time this has happened this season where they call Carlos to give him team orders and he just says, "Well, I'm in it for myself," and that's all you can expect out of someone who you fired. There's no team orders. He's not part of the team.
It's nonsense. And while I don't think this was necessarily a team order situation, I do think Charles Leclerc...
it was. They told him, don't put Charles under pressure. They told him not to overtake him, and then he just drove around him.
And it didn't help that Charles goosed his tyres in both stints he was in either, because he did that against Russell trying to chase him down and he failed spectacularly. And then he goosed his tyres when he was trying to pass Russell for the lead. He went all in for it and it failed. And then the second stint comes around, he gets passed by Sainz and he gooses his tyres trying to follow him there too. Like, don't get me wrong, this is not a great race by Charles by any stretch, but he was the faster driver over the weekend, in my opinion. And yeah,
the problem, I feel like Charles he chases the rabbit too often. Sometimes he will just get the bit between his teeth when he needs to run a cleaner, more conservative race. And that's not who oftentimes Charles is not that as a driver. He's the raw speed guy. He's going to go out and he's going to get you the lap time. That's what makes him so phenomenal in qualifying. But he's a ceiling guy. He rooted his tires multiple times this race. And it compromised him on both stints. It opened him up to Carlos attacking him. And when Carlos catches him after his final pit stop, he's got hotter tires. He's going to go around him anyways. You're more or less relying on Carlos standing on the brakes to not pass him. It's just not good race management from anyone involved, other than Sainz, who played this to perfection, other than an instance where Ferrari were going to bring him in for a pit stop and then they weren't ready and he had to go around again.
This porridge was just right today.
God, Ferrari have made so much progress this year. Even me as chief Ferrari hater number one can see that. But they still go into their old ways of thinking, oh, well, this is how this race is going to go. And then it doesn't go that way. And then it's like they can't adapt in the moment.
It's silly.
And they just end up looking so silly as a front-running team.
And look, I don't think this ultimately cost them anything in the end. I think third and fourth was the maximum they were going to get on the table, given how fast Mercedes were this weekend. It's just more social embarrassment. It's like buying the big issue in London out of social embarrassment. It's not really costing anything, but it's just unnecessary.
It's McLaren in Hungary. You got a 1-2, and you somehow had massive drama the whole way home.
Why can't you just win normally? Why can't you just do this in a quiet manner?
He screams incessantly.
That used to be the Mercedes problem. At least their wins are largely unproblematic at this point. Like Ferrari can't even get their own asses out of the way. That's just the most frustrating thing about them.
Drake, do we need to push back Lewis Hamilton's expiration date?
No, he qualified poorly, and that's what stopped him from challenging for the win. I think it was just a perfectly rated weekend for Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, because even all the fastest laps in the race, he had the bit between his teeth. He was flying up to Russell, and then it got below 5 seconds, and Russell punched another 2 seconds on him to finish out the race. Russell was never under threat.
No. Again, Hamilton makes life difficult for himself by qualifying badly. I need to point out, it's 21-6 head-to-head George Russell against Lewis Hamilton in qualifying this year. Russell has destroyed Lewis in qualifying this year. Lewis makes life hard for himself. I'm sorry, he just does. And he's going into a team next year with arguably the sport's best qualifier in it. This is at what point do we call this a genuine weakness at this point? Because Lewis's race pace is still phenomenal. I have no doubts about that part of the equation. But head-to-head, that is a startling statistic that cannot be ignored.
It's just hard to fathom this becoming the statistical greatest qualifier in the history of Formula One becoming like this.
Well, you say that, but what was his weakness? His only weakness against Valtteri Bottas?
It's qualifying.
What was his only weakness for a couple of years against Nico Rosberg? Qualifying.
Both Valtteri Bottas and Nico Rosberg have 20-plus pole positions in their careers. They were good qualifiers in their own right, especially Valtteri. On his day, he could straight up out-qualify Lewis. That was no questions asked. On a good day, that's what Bottas could do. It was the race pace of Lewis that often bailed him out and led to all those victories. Look, call it what it is, right? And I don't have doubts about Lewis when it comes to race trim, but if you're going to be competing at the very highest level, which is what we always assume with Lewis, is what we always give him the benefit of the doubt for because of his legacy, because he's arguably the greatest F1 driver of all time. If we're evaluating him on that level, this is a problem. This is a genuine problem. Well, and
the problem is, he's going into the Ferrari team next year. Leclerc, phenomenal qualifier, one of the best in the field. If Red Bull give Max enough, one of the best maybe the best qualifier in the field this year, given we know where the Red Bull has been weak. George Russell has waxed him in qualifying this year. Lando Norris, he can't keep a lead for shit, but damn it, he can qualify the car now.
Yeah. Hasn't Lando had, 7 poles this year?
Yeah, and I'd argue the McLaren isn't as much a qualifying car as a race pace car. It's very similar to the last 2 Red Bulls in that sense.
The point is, everyone at the front's got speed. Everybody at the front's now got speed. George Russell, again, has been a great qualifier at Mercedes since day one.
If it's as close as it is this year, next year, Lewis can't be qualifying 5th and 6th. Every race and expect to fight for the championship because he's not going to be able to cut through the field every single weekend.
It's an unfair expectation.
And as what I said about Charles a couple of minutes ago, this year, arguably the biggest step that I think Charles has taken the last year and a half or so has been actually managing races and managing his tires, because that was a huge weakness for him against Seb, and then through a couple of years at Ferrari up to about the middle of 23. That is not the weakness against Lewis that it would have been probably start of last year and the year before.
I think it's going to be a fascinating matchup next year. It's a mouth-watering fight. I mean,
I don't think you could get 2 different drivers, more different drivers in their approach of how they drive a car.
in a potential race winning / championship contending car next year, which should be a championship contender next year.
I can't even call it at this point because like these 4 cars, right? These
So
4
close.
front runners are swinging between upgrades, failed upgrades, temperature, tire compound.
It's been the most fluid development race in a championship that I can remember ever between these 4 teams.
I think a huge element of it, right, is going to come down to like 21, right, Dre?
Yeah.
How long before you cut things off and go all in on 26? Because there's going to be a championship and a constructors next year for the taking. Someone's going to go chase that rabbit.
It was Red Bull in 2013 when they had the chance to end things early. They didn't. They wanted to cement their legacy and said to go after number 4. We've seen it before where a team their eyes will get too big because they can't, because it's understandable. You want to chase the carrot that's right in front of you.
Next year is not guaranteed, especially with all new rules and all new engines coming in for 26, right? And Red Bull did this in 21. And it worked in a really silly roundabout way.
Mm-hmm.
And Mercedes put all that development, all that resource. They put more resources and time into their 2022 car than every other team perhaps put together. And it ended up being a log.
Yeah. And this is a season where Mercedes has 4 wins, McLaren has 5, Ferrari has 5, Red Bull have 8, all through Max's hands. Like, it's been a fascinating year when it comes to development and how this field has played out. And yeah, I genuinely have no idea where this next turn is going to be. So they're going to chase what's in front of them. It's a fascinating situation, and it was a fascinating weekend. Maybe not the best Vegas weekend out there, maybe not the best of the US weekends. I think it was a solid Grand Prix for what it's worth.
It was pretty solid. It was good. We got a lot to catch up on, of course. Niels Vidic is gone as Formula One's race director. They promoted Rui Marquez up from Formula 2 and Formula 3, where the Rui Marquez tenure immediately starts with Carlos Sainz being able to exploit a loophole in the pit entry regulations for the Grand Prix. Because at Baku, they said, once you're past the pit entry line, you have to come in and commit. And they didn't have that note at Vegas, so that's why Carlos Sainz cut across that white line at pit entry and got no penalty because they couldn't penalize it because there's no rule against it.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. If it's not in the book, you can't penalise them for it, and it needed to be in the race director notes, and which is weird because Franco Colapinto got warned for crossing that pit entry line during practice, and the drivers were like, "But we can't see the line," and Rui Marquez was like, "You know what? Fair enough," and they repainted it to make it clearer, and Sainz went over the line, and it didn't matter because there's no rule against it.
One more beehive to one more address.
Nah. First one's on the house. You know, he's allowed one.
Hey, he gets a jar of honey as a warning.
Yeah, he gets a jar of money as a warning and be told, listen, this one wasn't on you. It's come from people before you. Make sure you update the notes next year.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen next year for sure. Tough job being race director of any world championship. Hope it goes great for Mr. Marquez. Dan Fallows is also gone-ish. Aston Martin has reshuffled the decks. We haven't talked a lot about Aston Martin a lot of the time. They're a distant fifth in the championship.
Has been a whole lot to talk about.
They've been arse gravy for the last half season.
86, only 86 points. They finished at 280 last year, despite occupying the same position, the Constructors' Champions. They're in no danger of losing fifth place, but man, what a step back.
Look, it came out kind of this weekend and through Brazil. Like, they've brought 5 different floors this year, and none of them make the car any better. None of them change the fact that they fundamentally don't know how to add performance to this platform without breaking other stuff. Mm-hmm. They are not unique in that regard. That's what Red Bull has found out this year. That's what McLaren have been very carefully treading this year. Everyone at some point has brought a failed upgrade or something that hasn't quite worked. But nothing Aston has brought since the middle of last year has made them better.
This is the problem. And Cam's absolutely right. This year, more than any other I can remember in F1, has been the year of risky floor development because you don't know how good it's going to be until you put it on the car and you run it. Simulators have been calibrated incorrectly. Teams have got it wrong. They've taken gambles and missteps. The last year and a half, I'd argue, teams, because remember when we talked about Red Bull earlier and their development pains, they discovered it was the Barcelona upgrade in 2023 that set them down this path that's led them to this point where they're probably going to lose their Constructors title. Sergio Perez was right in what he was saying about the issues of the car at the time, but he wasn't listened to because Max was still winning every week.
He was pulling a Marquez and just driving through it.
Yeah,
but like,
it was a weird case where Perez wasn't wrong, but his opinion didn't matter because the man who did matter was winning anyway.
Yeah, and I suspect that's the only thing that's keeping Perez in his drive right now is we're sorry. By the way, please get your shit together.
Yeah,
I mean, again this weekend out in Q1, but like everything Aston has done, man, they have. It's not been a lack of development. It's been that there's been no good development.
And ultimately, you've got to remember as well, Dan Fallows, this ultimately fell on him. He took a lot of the credit for the team, if anything, jumping the shark by having a very, very fast car to open 2023 because they got ahead of the regulation changes better than anybody else did. Well, everybody else had missteps and had to figure this shit out. Since then, nothing good has happened, and ultimately Aston Martin themselves, I think it was Andy Stevenson, their sporting director, who spoke to the media about this during the Vegas weekend and basically said it was performance related. So ultimately Fallows has fallen on his sword for Aston Martin being massively off the pace this season. When Fernando Alonso finished 6th in Japan and said it was like a top 5 drive for him in his career, he actually may have had a bigger point than he realized rather than just being Fernando.
He was being Fernando. He can be right and still be being Fernando. But like,
you got to remember, Aston Martin's going for a big restructuring. They've got Cowell coming in there now as Group CEO. Obviously, we talked about Adrian Newey coming in for next year. They want to get their ducks in a row for 2026. They need to get their shit sorted now. And if you're going to get rid of someone like Dan Fallows, now's the time. Now, I need to be clear. He's not been fired. He's been removed from his post, but he's going to still remain in the overall Aston Martin group. But he will no longer be technical director.
Hard we'll see on that one because I've heard everything from he's basically at a desk job now to he's going to be reporting directly under Adrian.
Yeah,
new boss, same as the old boss, right? But I think a huge product of it is that remember what wind tunnel they're using. They're still using the Mercedes wind tunnel because theirs isn't quite up and operational yet. And we have spoken at length on this network about the development difficulties that Mercedes have had, where they pulled an inverse of Ferrari this year. They haven't understood their car whatsoever other than that 2-month stretch where they won 3 out of 4. So Aston is going to look very different next year. I'd kind of expect them to be black markers next year because you have to put everything into 26. For them, there isn't much to play for next year.
They got the majority of their points at the start of the year when they were still more competitive then than they are now. They are now...
that was when Alpine and RB just had
nothing.
Boats as cars.
Yeah. They're right. I mean, both cars got eliminated in Q1 this weekend in Vegas. They were dreadful. And Alonso drove his nuts off to even be competitive in that midfield group. Like Alonso had a really good weekend.
They started that poor man on softs.
What were you doing, Aston? Jesus.
It's something. Yeah. I don't know what it is, but it's
shit at the wall.
Yeah, it's seeing what's stuck. I mean, they haven't scored in 4 races.
It's bad. Shit is bad for them right now.
Alpine, this wasn't like a huge. This was like a bad.
This was confirmation rather than new news.
They're going to be a Mercedes customer in 2026, and next year will be the last year of the Viri power unit as we know it.
It's weird, right?
It's very weird. They had the highest speed at the Las Vegas Grand Prix thanks to DRS and tow.
And then what happened?
Pierre Gasly went pop, fizz over what a relief it is at the back.
Yeah, because apparently it actually caught Alpine out. The Gasly redlined his engine. He hit the hard rev limit on his power unit, and 20 seconds later, his engine exploded. 364 kilometers an hour. I thought that was the fastest speed clocked in Vegas. Turns out Alex Albon hit 369 kilometers per hour down Vegas's back straight.
Pretty nice.
The highest top speed recorded in Formula One since these new regulations came into play in 2017. 229 miles an hour in King's English. Rapid.
Pretty fast. It's just very aggravating with the way Renault has run this whole organization because, right, 2026 is your chance to right the wrongs of the last 10 years. All new engines, new turbos, new hybrid setup, and they threw it all in the bin because, by all accounts, the engine that they had on the dyno was a bit of a boat anchor. It's emblematic of everything Renault as an entity has been since 2014.
It sucks. It's frustrating for me because in the short term, this is actually probably quite pragmatic of Alpine to cut the bleeding off if they want to be a successful Formula One team. They're not doing it on their power units, and given they were stuck in an engine freeze, this is probably the right move, annoyingly. However, it also says to me you clearly had no faith in Viri, and that makes me sad. It makes me sad because there are hundreds of employees in that department whose jobs are going to be at risk. I know they've said that they're going to explore other avenues, but that doesn't fill me with confidence that their jobs are secure and safe. And that's shit on any level. On any level, it's horrible. And those guys have already went to Monza and protested what their situation was going to be. They knew this was coming, and there's
a lot of dead men walking right now in that engine shop. And
Bruno Fernand quit his role almost as an act of nobility to the people he was loyal to in that engine department back home. I actually gained a lot of respect for him in standing down at Alpine when he did, once he found out the real reason why that was.
Yeah.
I just don't get how I don't get how Renault, you're not a works team anymore, right?
Well,
why are you? I've heard a lot over the last 3 days of, oh, well, Cadillac, welcome to the big leagues now. Fuck the big leagues. Look at who's already in here. You've just ditched work status to be a customer for the short term. You think, are you ever going to be world champions again with Enstone? Because if you've got a Mercedes power unit, you are not going to be champions before Mercedes or McLaren are going to be.
Probably not, no.
You've ended an engine program, which I know there was some weird times in the late 90s up until 2001, but apart from that, Renault Formula One engines have been a part of Formula One as long as I've been alive, and now that's gone. I know it wasn't always successful, especially in the last 10 years, but especially in the 90s and the early 2010s, things were really, really good. Now that's just gone.
Losing a manufacturer is never good. There is no good that can come from that. It's sad. It's bad. And my heart goes out to everyone in Viri, and I sincerely hope that they still have jobs when next year comes and 2026 arrives and that things don't change. I'm going to get out of here real quick. We got Formula One this weekend, of course, in Qatar. Still a heated Constructors' Championship battle to fight for. 24 points covering McLaren and Ferrari. Do check that out if you haven't already. We'll be back next week to talk about Qatar. We'll see if there's a MotoGP season review. I'll think about it maybe the week after. Maybe after we get F1 out of the way in the run-up to Christmas. We'll have to wait and see about scheduling and whatnot. Stay tuned on that.
Don't make me talk about Honda MotoGP. Don't do that to me.
I'm going to make you talk about Honda
Don't
MotoGP
do this to
and
me.
you'll
Don't
like
you
it.
put that evil on my Andre Harrison. Don't you put that on us.
Motherfucker full named me, you little shit. I've been Dre Harrison. He's been Cam Buckley and RJ O'Connell. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you guys next time. Sayonara.
Later, y'all. Oh, by the way, we got GM versus Ford back in F1 now. It's great.
I won't trust that engine program unless the engine code starts with LS.